Moving this model forward from today is of course a process of continuous improvement. Whatever governance we have in place has to be agile, has to be responsive to all those needs that are evolving out there in the community, and of course has to provide a voice. And kind of the second bullet point kind of says this too: provide a voice for that distributed community. Make sure that the folks like yourselves that are out there implementing exchanges have a means of being heard by the top levels of the governance of the NEEM program, and have a chance to influence the way the program is developed going forward. We'll talk a little bit about domain independence, but governance also has to be something that's sustainable, that's going to be lightweight enough that it doesn't collapse of its own weight as this program grows and evolves. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But what will we end up with? And again, hopefully this is a graphic that's familiar to many of you. Maybe a little hard to read. I guess the font size is big enough there. We end up with a governance model that has multiple levels in it. The Executive Steering Council is composed of Justin's boss, Vance Hitch, the DOJ CIO, the DHS CIO, Richard Spires, recently appointed, as well as a state and local representative who right now happens to be the chair of the Global Justice Information Sharing Committee, the Federal Advisory Committee for the Attorney General. That is Bob Bomer of the state of Illinois. So basically you've got two federal CIOs and a state and local representative making those strategic decisions on membership, on funding. They will advise the program on directions in terms of new domains and new communities of interest that the program brings along. At the bottom of this graphic, that grassroots level is represented. NEEM has three operational committees, I should say. One is communications and outreach. And the two that really do the work driving the model forward, collecting information from the field and making sure that it gets incorporated into the model going forward, are the Technical Architecture Committee and the Business Architecture Committee. And again, I'm in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into the individual responsibilities of those two committees. But again, it's ensuring that this entire community is adequately represented. In the middle of the model, of course, is the day-to-day operations, directed by the executive director and deputy executive director. They serve at the pleasure of the executive steering committee. Those roles will rotate back and forth between the two departments that are currently driving NEEM, Homeland Security and DOJ. That middle level, of course, also provides the full-time staffing to the program to actually make the strategies from the high level and the grassroots needs from the grassroots level to make those a reality in the program. But of course, there's something that's missing from this model, from this governance model, and that's the ability of each of the domains to manage their part of the model and to make sure that the unique needs of each domain are met. And again, it's this added dimension, this added challenge to the NEEM program of cutting across domains. So what you have to recognize is that, sorry, this is a little messy, but the message here is that at the domain level, there needs to be a group of representatives who are responsible for maintaining each one of those little rose petals on the diagram, right? Roles, again, the important part of the domain governance, about that really operational level here, is that the management of the model is driven by or adequately represents the entire community of interest, whether it's law enforcement or immigration, all levels of government, federal, state, tribal, local, private industry are all represented, as well as the different skill sets, executive, managerial, technical, that are represented in each one of those domains. What do domain governance groups, what do these groups do? Within each one of those individual domains, they're responsible for driving adoption and use, making sure that, as Phil said, in the immigration area, community, that awareness of NEEM and its payback is well communicated and driven down to the implementation level, providing outreach and training, and as well as helping to make decisions on how all of the best practices from all of those exchanges across the country end up being incorporated into the model. And we'll talk about that process in just a minute. But really what domain governance is about is collecting the best practices and as well as the expansions that are happening across the country and making sure that they're reflected in a model that the entire NEEM community can use going forward. Clark mentioned harmonization. That's really the process of working across domains, making sure that, again, we have semantic agreement across this community on what it is that we're trying to share. As well as from each domain's unique perspective, being able to advise both the program at the program management office level and the executive steering committee on what the strategic priorities ought to be. So that, again, there's this blending of high-level strategic vision of where the program is going, but it's informed by the involvement of folks at all levels of government that are actually out there using NEEM on the front lines. We talk a little bit about reach back when we talk about domain governance. That's, again, just this ability to draw on and leverage all of the experiences from all of you and all the people that you represent. Make sure that we have the best ideas and the best experiences reflected in the model. A couple examples. I just want to try and make this a little bit more real, kind of bring it down to just give you an update on what's happening in a few of these domain areas. Justice has been around for, according to Paul Embley, who chairs the XML Structure Task Force, since before paper. So that's why they don't have a charter, because the stone tablet broke. But the XML Structure Task Force was really the group that that created the original XML that became the Global Justice Data Model. As a good example of domain governance, the FBI, as well as state and local law enforcement, the courts, prosecutors, all these different functional areas, these disciplines in the justice community are represented on that committee, as well as the industry. And Paul will talk a little bit about, or quite a bit, about the industry involvement in the justice community momentarily. Emergency management is another good example. Here's a partnership between a couple of different offices that have some responsibility in emergency management and in coordinating first responders at DHS. You'll hear this afternoon about their interactions and their work with the OASIS committee, that publishes emergency data messaging standards. And they talk about being a mini NEEM and about really making sure that at the domain level in making sure that NEEM works for the emergency management community, that they are meeting all of these requirements that we talked about before. Top-down strategic direction, grassroots involvement, the voice of the practitioners informs the model. So similarly, in the geospatial community, relatively small domain, but an important one because it includes the best of the national standards for how to represent location and elements on a map. So here's one that's where the need is to stay connected to the national thought leaders on geospatial information, something that everybody in any domain can take advantage of who has a need to look at location and geographic elements. Screening is a partnership in 5 different mission areas or component areas in DHS who all have a similar common business process of being able to identify individuals and whether or not they're a person of interest in one of the many databases that contain persons of interest across the country so that people coming into our borders don't slip between the cracks. Okay. What I'm going to do now, I'm a non-technical guy, and I'm going to brief a couple of technical pictures here from the engineers of the data model. But what we're going to talk about is taking this governance model and putting it in action, and that's how exactly do the best practices, the improvements, the expansions of the model end up in implementation, end up in the model. You'll hear tomorrow about the 2.1 release of NEEM. And what I'm just going to do is bring you up to speed really quickly on how information has gotten into that 2.1 release in the last couple of years since the last release. Domain independence is really about how do we take this and make it sustainable, make sure that it's lightweight enough that going forward we can continue to incorporate these best practices. big diagram. You'll get more information on this in some of the technical tracks. But the point of this, again, is that every one of those IEPDs, those exchanges that are being built across the country, has an opportunity to be incorporated into future improvements in the model. The new elements or improved elements through the governance process, maybe in a 2.1 release or a 3.0 release in the future. Let me just go through this relatively quickly. I'm running out of time, all right, Justin? Okay. So, again, just to recap here real quickly. I'm sorry, this is more about going forward. Now, what we want to do is, rather than the Program Management Office and these committees and the operations making all these decisions, we want to be able to push as much of the decision-making authority out to state and local and federal, out to the implementers and out to these domain governance groups. Going forward, we want, when we talk about domain independence, we want to make sure that domains can publish their own updates, so that when best practices or corrections are discovered, they can be available for the community in a more immediate fashion. This obviously supports IEPD developers who, again, going back to one of the original thoughts, want to be agile, want to be responsive to changing needs out there in the communities. And again, you'll see some things about version architecture throughout the week. What we want to do is provide a well-defined, established process, as well as the tools and the technical assistance to support that process. I can just go through these really quickly. As you might guess, NBAC, the Business of Architecture Committee, becomes sort of the fulcrum between the grassroots developers and the strategic management of the program, and coordinates the activity across those domains, things like harmonization, making sure that the domains are agree on the semantics, as Clark was talking about. The PMO obviously has the day-to-day operations, manages the timelines, manages the schedules, makes sure that we stay in line with the strategic direction as articulated by the Executive Steering Committee. And basically the trend here in the future is to push more of the responsibility and more of the tools down to the domain level, so that individual domains, like emergency management, that envision itself as a mini NEEM serving that emergency management community, has the tools and has the well-defined roles and responsibilities so that it can maintain its part of the NEEM model and still participate in this larger national community. And just finish up real quickly. Thanks, Justin. Sorry if I took a little too much of your time. Okay, great. Thank you.
We have some time. Any questions for anyone on the panel, myself, pertaining to the adoptions, drivers, the value proposition, or the overall governance model? Sir. I can speak to grant funding that is coming from the Department of Justice, as well as the Department of Homeland Security. In both of those instances, grant funding does come with a requirement that whatever is utilized in the IT community is NEEM conforming. So that is a prerequisite in the acceptance of federal grant money out to state, local, tribal, educational, wherever that money goes, even into private sector development. And hopefully Paul will speak to that a little bit as we move forward as to one of the value propositions for industry as to why it's important that your product sets have a path road to NEEM conformance.